Today is December 9th, 2009. We are in the Glenview Public Library, and we are here to interview Mr. Kuehn. Mr. Kuehn, when were you born?
I was born in 1943,
What branch of service did you serve in?
the United States Marine Corps,
What was the highest rank that you achieved?
sergeant.
Where did you serve?
I was in the Marine Air Wing, so my initial duty station was NAS Glenview.
You grew up in Glenview, right?
I did.
And what was it like growing up in Glenview?
Well, my parents moved to Glenview in 1948, and Glenview in 1948 was one of the early developing suburbs of Chicago because it's located on a railroad track, and most of the homes in Glenview were spread around farmlands, and they were small homes. They weren't the type of homes that you commonly see in Glenview now. They were little 3-bedroom homes. My parents moved into a home on Harlem Avenue, just off of Harlem Avenue on Harrison Street. We were 3 homes west of Harlem, and everything from the first block west of Harlem until you got to the first block east of Shermer was farms and orchards. There was only one block developed between Harlem and Shermer back in 1948 when they moved in, and I went through kindergarten through 5th grade here. And my memories of Glenview were so fond that I moved my family here when we bought our second home, which is where my wife and I really raised our children, and we still live in the same home. Our first home we bought in Skokie, but I wanted to move to Glenview.
Where did you go to school here in Glenview?
I went to OLPH.
Okay. What did you hear about Vietnam when you lived here in Glenview?
Well, I didn't have to hear anything about Vietnam. I was in the Marine Reserve from 1963 through 1969, and I spent every one weekend a month at the Naval Air Station, Glenview, training Marine Air Wing personnel in a VMF 543, a jet squadron. I was in charge of the hydraulic and structure shop, which means the people under me were responsible for everything from the hydraulic systems, which control the brake system and the flaps and everything to do with the flight of the airplane, brakes, everything, the tires on hard landings, and the skin of the aircraft is the structure, the outside maintenance of the airplane itself.
Why did you enlist in the Marine Corps Reserve?
Well, I went in during the time when everybody had to serve in one branch of the service or the other, unless you were mentally or physically unable to serve. It was a mandatory service, mandatory registration for the service at age 18, and everybody had to serve a minimum of a 6-month reserve program on active duty for your basic training and everything related to the position that you were qualified for. And then after that, you served the rest of your term spending 1 weekend a month at your duty station and 2 weeks every year on active military reserve status for extended training. More training than you could get just on a weekend, so 2 weeks every year.
Why did you choose the Air Wing?
I chose the Marine Corps because I wanted to be a Marine. I chose the Air Wing because it was right here at NAS Glenview, and it was close to my home. And with 2 small children, it was a duty station for my weekend duty that was convenient for me, so I chose the Air Wing.
Did you enlist in the Marine Corps Reserve to avoid the possibility of being drafted?
Not at all. I joined the Marine Corps because you were going to either have to join some branch of the service and have your service obligation behind you, or you're going to be drafted into whatever position they wanted you, just whenever whenever they wanted you to go. And I took a job as a sales trainee after one semester at Wright Junior College in Chicago and a varsity degree in golf. So I decided that inasmuch as I only had enough money for one semester, that I'd better look for a job. And I found a position in the merchandise mart in Chicago as a sales trainee. And they wanted to give me a territory, but they could not give me a territory until I had my military out of the way, because it was going to have to happen at one point or the other. You were either going to have to sign up and go, or you were going to get drafted. And before they could give me a sales territory, they suggested that I get the military out of the way.
What was the Glenview Naval Air Station like at the time of your service?
It was a little city unto itself. It had all different types of aircraft there, not only Marine, but Navy, Coast Guard as well. We had everything from jet squadrons to helicopter squadrons. We had Navy and Coast Guard personnel there as well with helicopters. That was the base where they would service Lake Michigan and boaters out of NAS Glenview in those days. And it had everything from the little white church that you see in the Glen today, which, by the way, was built by prisoners during World War II. I'm not sure if you know about that. It's no longer in its original place where it was when the air station was active, but they moved it to preserve it, and a lot of that happened through the work of the organization here in Glenview called the Hangar One Foundation, that worked very hard with the village of Glenview during the conversion of the Naval Air Station to the Glen, to preserve the military history so that we would never lose what we had.
Did you live on base housing, or?
No, I lived in Glenview, and I had to go to the report for duty on every Saturday morning and be able to leave no later than sometime on Sunday night. So depending on what was going on at the time, if we had to spend the night, we did. If we didn't have to spend the night, we could go home for the night. But there were plenty of times, due to weather circumstances or whatever it was, that you didn't go home. You found a bunk on the base.
How did it feel to be able to serve in the military and do what you had to do, but also be able to see your family?
Well, it felt, it was a really, hate to use it during a military interview, but it was a double-edged sword. I had 2 children and a wife, and I was training people who were being deployed because the pecking order of deployment during mandatory service is different than it is during volunteer service. Now everybody in the armed forces is a volunteer. If you volunteer and you've got 12 kids, you're no different than a volunteer with no children. But there were different rules during the mandatory service years, and the pecking order was married 1 child, married 2 children, and so consequently, even though my position in the military as the department head of the hydraulic instructor shop in a jet squadron was a high priority MOS, the fact that I had 2 children put me a little further down on the pecking order, and I either unfortunately or fortunately never was able to be deployed because of the marital and fatherhood status. It bothered me for a long time. It took me years and years to get over the fact that I was trained to fight, and people were fighting, and I wasn't. Even as recently as the initial surge of Desert Storm, I still felt like I was physically and capable of being there. My children at that point were raised and married. I felt like, you know, maybe maybe I should do that. So that was tough.
Yeah.
That was tough.
Can you give any more insight into the differences between the mandatory service area and the volunteer area? Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I think that the caliber of those that served didn't change at all. The only thing that was different is that it meant during mandatory service responsibility that everybody had an opportunity to find out what it was like to serve in the armed forces. So we all knew exactly what those that preceded us in Korea, World War II, World War I, we all had the same indoctrination through boot camp and military training. Everybody in those years had a sense of military history because it was part of your basic training. Unfortunately, today, the only sense of military history people have is what they see on a news clip on a news channel. We were taught it. We knew what the chain of command was. We knew what military history was. We knew all of the things that our fathers were taught. We were taught the same. I think 6 months of active duty and some reserve time is a small price to pay for the knowledge you gain as a citizen of this country. It's a small price. But I think, I regret the day that we changed that. I think our whole mores and way we look at life changes if you have not been exposed to the same things that your father, grandfather, great-grandfather was trained and understood about our country.
So do you think there should still be a draft today?
I think a draft is a word that is used for needed deployment. There's a difference between utilizing a draft and having a system where people are required to have some knowledge of the service. A draft means saddle up, we're going. A mandatory service means if you wait until the last minute, then somebody's going to come and say, okay, you never volunteered for this, now we're going to ask you to serve, and this is where and when you will. I think that there was some value in the moral fiber of this country that we don't have today, with everybody being as keenly aware of military service and military history. I know that sounds harsh because I served, but I know the people I grew up with. We're close today. I still am active in the American Legion in Glenview, still participate in the parades and ceremonies, and when one of our members is taken from us, and we call that a transfer to post-everlasting, at the family's request, we attend that funeral in honor of our fallen comrade. And those traditions and histories are going to die someday. Did any of your children serve in the military? No. They grew up in the era of non-mandatory service. Closest they ever came to being in the military was being my child.
I'd just like to go back a little bit, back to the Naval Air Station. Can you describe a typical day on the base?
Well, the West Lake entrance where the youth services building is was the main gate to the Naval Air Station. There was a guardhouse there and an MP on duty, and you pulled up every morning depending on what your duty status was and checked in at that gate. You had to come through there in civilian clothes and change into your work uniform once you got on base. You were not allowed to travel off base in your utility uniform. The only uniform that was acceptable to leave a base would be a Class A winter or Class A summer uniform, never utilities. So we came in civilian clothes and changed into our military utilities once we got on base. And then we would have morning muster and report to our duty stations, in my case the hydraulic and structure shop. And when the pilots, who were also, some of them were also in the reserve program, and they would have to get their flight time in. So those planes that they were using to get their flight hours to stay eligible as military pilots, we were the ones that on the weekends would service those planes. And there was always some active duty personnel on weekend duty to supervise us, because obviously we're only there one weekend a month, and the active duty Marines are there every day. So they are the ones that actually trained us and supervised our work on the weekend. Obviously you don't want pilots going up in airplanes with a sales trainee.
Today, what is your view on the Glenview Naval Air Station?
I think the village of Glenview has done an outstanding job in conjunction with the Hangar One Foundation to preserve as much of the military history of the base as we could and still make it an economically viable acquisition for Glenview. The streets, as you go through there, all have some sort of military significance, whether it's Independence or Valor or whatever street you're on in the Glen, is all got some perspective to the history of the Naval Air Station.
Is there anything that you think would be really interesting for someone in Glenview to know, like as they were walking through the Glen, something that you think has relevance?
Well, I can tell you that that now we have this magnificent Glen Club there, which is a championship caliber golf course. But we also had a golf course there in the days of Naval Air Station Glenview, but because it was a flight field, the Naval Air Station Glenview was a flat as this tabletop. There was very little trajectory or perspective of the topography of the land. It was pretty flat. 16 of the 18 holes went east and west. Only 2 went north and south, and they were both par 3s. So the golf course was in terrific condition. If the commanding officer of the Naval Air Station was a golfer, and it suffered a little bit if the commanding officer wasn't a golfer. So it was a place where we had, for example, our Navy League. If you were a member of the Navy League, even though you weren't on active duty, the Navy League was given the opportunity to play the golf course on a greens fee type basis. It was a nice little clubhouse where people could mingle and congregate. But there were also other facilities there. There was an officers club, and there was an NCO club, where, you know, there was even a bowling alley, and movie theater. And it was a well laid out facility. As a matter of fact, the towers that you see in the town center now, those were the original towers where the north tip of the Glen Town Center, just to the north of the tower, that's where our jet squadron was located. That was the jet hangar. And now it's a children's learning facility called Make a Masterpiece, or you know, and that's where I got my fingernails full of grease.
Do you think the memorials that have been incorporated in the Glen capture the spirit of the place you knew?
I think that they certainly help. The preservation of the chapel as a historic landmark, as you're driving through there, is quite visual for anybody that understands why it's there. It kind of sits near the park center, and there's this little white chapel. The only thing that's different about it now, it's a facility of the Glenview Park District, so the cross on the top of the steeple is no longer there. So other than that, it's there. The altar in the chapel is on a rotating pedestal, so that they could turn the altar to have either Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish services. And the only thing that's different about it now is the fact that it's a public park district facility. The cross is now located in the historical museum. It is no longer on the top of the steeple.
The Naval Air Station brought a lot of diversity to Glenview. Do you think now that it's gone that's changed at all? The diversity of the people in Glenview?
Well, the Naval Air Station, to be honest with you, in those years, the diversity that was there was because everybody is a Marine, everybody is a sailor, everybody is a Coast Guardsman. There is the only diversity that we knew was which branch of the service you were in. That was as diverse as it got. It wouldn't have mattered one way or the other what other diversity was there. There's probably more diversity in Glenview now just because of the amount of people coming to this country and living in this country than was diversity in Glenview at that time. But as far as your question about the monuments or the statues, of course, the fountain in the Park Center with the Navy airmen and pilot around the fountain, and the Navy mast that sits between Bravo Restaurant and Mitchell's Fish Market with the flags on it is stunning to see at any time. Across the street, we've got the other memorial that was just dedicated within the year or a year and a half, and that's as you're going up the Patriot Boulevard and you see the flags of all of the branches of the services. The Freedom Memorial is there, and it's a statue of a man with his arm around a little boy looking at the what is considered the field burial statue, which is the sandbags with the rifle and bayonet in the ground with a helmet on the top, and that's a symbol of field burial, and the man and boy are looking at that symbol. And I was proud to have been asked to participate on the dais on the dedication of that monument. A very proud day in my life.
Okay, I have to ask this. There's two anti-aircraft guns across from the towers where the airfield was.
Mhm.
Were those real?
They were. They I haven't had a chance to go over and look at them close up. They sit out in what is called Gallery Park, and I've seen them from afar. I haven't examined them close up, so I really don't have a knowledge of how they got there. But to the best of my knowledge, they were at one time serviceable. I don't believe those are replicas at all.
So the Naval Air Station was ready to defend against an air attack. Is that what they were there for?
The Naval Air Station, being an inland station, was not really a place where you would expect to be defending your country sitting in the heart of America. It was a place where you would expect the people that were training there and serving there would have been deployed from to go serve and protect America, not necessarily that Glenview was going to be attacked. So we trained to go wherever we had to, and we were trained well. There was no difference in the training that a full-time member of the armed forces received and a member of the reserves received. You all went through the same boot camps, and then after boot camp you either went to ground training or air training. So after my 3 months of Marine boot camp in Parris Island, I went to Jacksonville, Florida for flight school, and that's where I took my flight training. And then you come back to your home duty station, which in my case would have been NAS Glenview, for your last month of active duty training for that 6 months of active duty that you are required to serve when you join a reserve program. So you go through the same boot camp as everybody else, you go through the same training schools as everybody else, and then you come back to your home duty station for your last month of on-the-job training, working at at the base that you're going to be serving your reserve time in.
What do you do today as a member of the board of American Legion Post 166?
I serve as adjutant, which is a board position, and in terms of what we accomplish is we're always trying to join with American Legions all over the United States in several common goals. One is always being a spokesperson for veterans and veterans' rights and veterans' opportunities, to make sure that when people are pulling the plugs on things, that the people that got us to this stage are not forgotten. We also make sure that we serve as a lobby group to see if there's better ways to do things. If we see that, for example, some of the facilities need updating, we become, instead of one person calling it to the attention of our government, we become a group doing that. We also spend a lot of time trying to just be visible in the community, because we understand that people haven't had to serve for a long time. And so when it comes to Flag Day, we are an active participant in that public event. We're an active participant in the 4th of July parade, the Veterans Day ceremony, the Memorial Day parade. Again, we're there to support the families of those that are transferring to what we refer to in the American Legion as post-everlasting. So if a family requested, this Friday night, we've been requested to be at Scott Hablewaite here in Glenview to honor a transfer to post-everlasting this coming Friday.
What day did your service in the Marine Corps end, or when?
My military came to an end in 1969. So I was in the Marine Reserve program from 1963 through 1969. They had asked if I would like to serve another term in the reserves and become a staff sergeant. However, the other thing that you have to understand about those 2 weeks of active deployment in those years, that was your vacation. So the people you worked for had to let you go for your 2 weeks, but that was your vacation time. And I really didn't feel like I wanted to raise my children without them ever having a vacation with their father. So I turned down the opportunity to re-up in the reserve program. I turned down the extra stripe, and I felt that that I needed to be able to spend some vacation time with my children on vacations. If it wasn't for that, I probably would have stayed a longer stint in the reserve program. But married with 2 children and not having the opportunity to go on vacations with them because you used your vacation time for your military time entered into my decision not to stay in any longer.
Did you continue with the same job?
I stayed when I came back and I got my 6 months active duty out of the way. They kept their commitment and they saved me a slot, and they gave me my first sales territory. So I came out of the military. I was probably only when I finished my 6 months of active duty, I was only 20 years old, and I was given my first sales territory at age 20, because even though I admitted earlier that I had 1 semester at Wright College, it was once I got the job as a sales trainee, I knew sales was exactly what I wanted to do. So I took all kinds of correspondence courses in sales, sales psychology, sales motivation, sales management, and trained myself to be the best salesperson that I could be. And took the first sales job at age 20, and that was in the apparel industry. I traveled the state of Wisconsin selling Wrangler jeans to major retailers, and I stayed in that field for 27 years in the apparel industry.
Do you still have any relationships with the friends you made in the time of your service?
I do. As a matter of fact, the staff sergeant that was over my shop, the hydraulic instructor shop, his name was Staff Sergeant Sam Caselli, and he's still a member of the American Legion. He's still a member of our Glenview Marines. We have an organization called the Glenview Marines, which is not as official in an organization as the American Legion. We get together maybe once a quarter and get together for lunch over at Hackney's on Lake Street, and we get to stay in contact. And Sam is somebody I looked up to in the Marine Corps, and he's somebody I look up to this day. And a really dear friend of mine who shared the dais with me at the deployment or the Freedom Memorial, retired Colonel Ace Reilly, a Marine fighter pilot, is a dear friend of mine to this day. The one thing I enjoy about the Marine Corps, whether you were a sergeant or a colonel or a general or a lieutenant, in the Marine Corps, you're all Marines. And every other branch of the service, an officer has a different name than an enlisted man. And, you know, in the Navy, you've got sailors and officers, and in the Army, you've got soldiers and officers, and in the Marine Corps, you have Marines. So I have a great many friends that rank all the way up to the rank of general in civilian life, and that are parts of the either the American Legion or the Glenview Marines, and I enjoy their company thoroughly.
How do you think being in the Marine Corps has shaped you as a person?
I think it gave me the discipline to do things that somebody with my academic background should never have been able to do. I think it gave me the perseverance, the confidence to do things that people might say that you can't do. My wife and I have been married 44 years, and we have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Our son has an MBA in international marketing from DePaul, and our daughter has an education background at Western and currently works as a special ed teacher. And so we're very proud of them. And I'm sure that that my Marine Corps background was my university.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we've not covered in this interview?
I just said that I would do this for the historical perspective of the difference between mandatory service and volunteer service. No Marine likes to sit in front of a camera and say he didn't fight. That's what I was trained to do. I never had the opportunity. I spent a long time with that shadow hanging over me. I think as I approach almost 47 years since I first put on the Marine Corps uniform, I think I'm starting to get over it now. The people that I associate with in the American Legion and the Glenview Marines, they certainly have made me feel welcome. They don't make me feel any different than them. So I just think that this is a perspective that maybe somebody else wouldn't be able to give you. And I just did it for the perspective of it. I wish I could tell you about some great battle that I won, but I can't.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, Mr. Kuehn.
You're welcome.
Thank you.